There's a spiral notebook with a floral cover sitting in an evidence room in Greene County, Ohio, and every page of it is about me. Dates, doses, my reactions, graded like homework, in tidy cafeteria handwriting. A detective slid it across a table and asked if I recognized the writing, and I did. It belonged to my mother-in-law, the same hand that signed our Christmas cards. I'm Tori Myers, a hospital dietitian, 37 now. Food is my profession, which made her theory about me that much crueler. Her theory was that my deadly allergy was fake. What she did to prove it nearly stopped my heart in front of 40 guests at her own birthday dinner. And here's what she didn't know. While she kept her notebook on me, I was keeping one on her. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet women tell you how they stood their ground when family crossed the line. Stories about boundaries, betrayal, and the calm kind of justice that doesn't need to raise its voice. If stories like mine keep you company, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. Now let me take you back to the first Sunday dinner where all of this started. I should tell you who I am, because it matters for everything that came after. I've spent 11 years as a registered dietitian at Miami Valley South Hospital, just outside Dayton, Ohio. I paid my own way through my dietetics degree, working night shifts at a nursing home, wiping down trays and logging meal charts until my eyes crossed. Nobody handed me anything. I met Kyle Myers when he carried one of his students into the emergency room at my hospital with a broken arm. He's a high school biology teacher and a baseball coach, and he held that kid's good hand the whole time like it was his own son. That's the man I married 6 years ago. We bought a small brick house in Beaver Creek, 15 minutes from his mother's place, close enough for Sunday dinners and far enough to breathe. Hospital work gives you habits that never turn off. You wash your hands before you think about it. You notice when a story doesn't match a symptom. And you live by one rule they drill into you from the first semester. If it isn't charted, it didn't happen. Write it down with the date and the time, or it doesn't exist. I didn't know yet that this one habit would end up saving my life. Kyle was easy to love. Steady. Funny. The kind of man who tears up at graduations that aren't his. His family was the fine print. Every marriage has some, and I'd read enough charts to know you don't skip the fine print. I just misread whose name was on it. The first Sunday dinner at Lorraine's, she'd cooked for 9 hours and hugged me at the door like I was already hers. I remember thinking, this is going to be fine. The Allergy showed up when I was 34, over our 3rd anniversary dinner of lobster tails, one warm September evening. I'd eaten shrimp my whole life. 20 minutes after the first bite, my palms started itching like I'd grabbed a nettle. Then hives climbed my arms. Then my lips went thick and my breath started whistling on the way in. Kyle drove me to the emergency room doing 60 in a 45, and I remember apologizing to the triage nurse for the fuss, because of course I did. The allergist, Dr. Whitman, laid it out for me the next week. Shellfish allergy is the most common food allergy to appear in American adults. You can eat shrimp for 34 years and your immune system can still change its mind without asking you. He did the skin prick tests, ran the blood work for specific antibodies, and both came back screaming. This was not a sensitivity. This was the kind of allergy that comes with a talk about airways in minutes. From that day on, I carried 2 epinephrine auto-injectors everywhere I went. 2, always, because sometimes 1 isn't enough. I read every label in the grocery store. I learned that shellfish hides in Caesar dressing and Worcestershire sauce and half the soup aisle. Kyle practiced with the trainer pen on his own thigh until he could do it with his eyes closed. My coworkers adjusted the potlucks without being asked. My own mother, down in Kentucky, cried on the phone and then mailed me a laminated card for my wallet. Everyone in my life took it seriously. Well, almost everyone. There was one person who smiled through the whole explanation like I was a child describing a monster under the bed. Lorraine Myers ran a school cafeteria for 31 years, and if you think that sounds humble, you never met Lorraine. She fed 1,000 children a day, and she could tell you the year the county switched to frozen green beans the way veterans tell you about campaigns. She was 62 when all this started, widowed 9 years, and her kitchen was the throne room of the family. Sunday dinner wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Her casseroles closed out every funeral and bake sale at First Grace Church, and the congregation called her a saint, and she never once corrected them. Food was her love language. It was also her leash. She fed you, and then she owned a little piece of you, and if you didn't clean your plate, you were spitting on everything she'd sacrificed. Kyle grew up marinating in that gratitude. His sister Brooke, 38, worked at a bank, and had perfected the art of agreeing with their mother before Lorraine finished her sentence. The first time I explained my diagnosis at that table, carefully, gently, the way I'd explain a new diet order to a nervous patient, Lorraine folded her hands and smiled at me with her head tilted, like I was a slow student. In 31 years of feeding children, she said, I never once saw a shellfish allergy. Picky eaters? Yes. Allergies? No. Brooke laughed into her sweet tea. Kyle squeezed my knee under the table, which I would learn was his entire strategy for the next 2 years. I told myself she was from a different generation. I told myself she'd come around. In my job, you're trained to give people the benefit of the doubt. It's a beautiful habit. It almost got me killed. The first Sunday dinner after my diagnosis, Lorraine made gumbo. I stood in her kitchen and asked, as nicely as I knew how, whether there was shrimp in it. She didn't answer right away. She wiped her hands on her apron slow, like I'd insulted her mother, her church, and the state of Ohio in one sentence. There's chicken, she said finally. Eat around it. Eat around it. I want you to sit with that sentence, because an allergist will tell you that shellfish protein doesn't stay politely on its side of the pot. For someone like me, the broth itself is loaded. I said I'd just have the cornbread and salad, and the temperature in that kitchen dropped 10 degrees. Kyle tried to smooth it over. Mom, it's a medical thing, it's not about your cooking. And Lorraine said, everything in this house is about my cooking. Which was honestly the truest thing she ever told me. Brooke stage whispered high maintenance to her mother by the stove, just loud enough to reach me. I let it go. That's the part I want to be honest about. I was a guest. I was new. And I've sat with enough combative families over hospital meal plans to know when a fight costs more than it buys. So I ate my cornbread and I smiled. That night, at home, a faint itch bloomed around my mouth, prickly and hot. Cross contact, I told myself. Her ladles, her pots, 40 years of seafood boils soaked into that kitchen. I took an antihistamine and typed a note into my phone. Date. What I ate. What I felt. Old habit. Chart it. I had no idea I'd just written the first line of evidence in a criminal case. A few Sundays later, it was pot roast, and I checked everything on that table like a customs agent. Beef, carrots, potatoes, rolls. Nothing that should have touched the ocean in its whole life. 2 hours after dinner, I was on my knees in our bathroom, sick to my stomach, hives rising along my collarbone in warm little welts. Kyle called his mother because he thought maybe something had gone off. Food poisoning, a bad roast. Lorraine drove over with a Tupperware of soup, sat on the edge of my couch, and rubbed my back in front of my husband. Then she said it, in the sweetest voice you've ever heard. The voice you'd use on a frightened toddler. It's all in your head, sweetheart. I remember lying there, itching, humiliated, while she explained to Kyle that new wives sometimes need attention, that stress does strange things to women my age, that in her day nobody had time for allergies. And the awful part, the part I hope you never live, is that the room agreed with her. Kyle rubbed my shoulder and said, Mom means well. At work that week, my friend Jess, an ICU nurse, the kind who says the quiet thing out loud, frowned over her coffee and said, Twice in a row, right after her cooking? Tori, you're the one who taught me correlation isn't nothing. I laughed it off. Coincidence, cross-contact, an old kitchen. But a dietitian's brain doesn't stop charting just because her heart wants to. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a column had opened up with Lorraine's name at the top of it, so I started counting. I wish I could tell you the count stayed small. I want to be clear about something, because I know how these stories usually go. I did not sit there sweetly for 2 years and let it happen. I acted early, and I acted like a professional. I started asking about ingredients before every meal, out loud in front of witnesses. I offered to bring a dish of my own every Sunday. Casseroles, brisket, my grandmother's rolls. So there'd always be something safe on that table. I checked Lorraine's pantry once while helping put away groceries and found a bottle of oyster sauce in the door of her fridge, which proves nothing by itself. Half the kitchens in America have one. But I noted it. I asked her, kindly, if she could set aside a plain portion for me before sauces went on. She agreed with so much sugar in her voice it should have come with a warning label. And then, every single week, she forgot. Oh, sweetheart, it slipped my mind. I'm an old woman. So I stopped eating her cooked dishes. If it came off her stove, I passed. Dessert and coffee I still accepted. Peace offerings, the last warm thread between us. Simple, quiet, almost airtight. Remember the almost. That's when Lorraine discovered her real talent, the one no cafeteria ever gave her room for. She turned my caution into cruelty. Mine, not hers. At Easter, in front of 2 aunts and the pastor's wife, she looked at my little glass dish of scalloped potatoes and announced, with her chin trembling just so, "She brings Tupperware to my table now. 31 years I fed this county, and my own daughter-in-law won't touch my food." The aunts looked at me like I'd slapped her. That's the thing nobody tells you about poison. The first thing it kills is your reputation. Thanksgiving that year is the meal I still see when I close my eyes. 22 people, 2 folding tables, Lorraine in her ruffled apron holding court over a spread that could feed a battalion. She'd made her famous corn casserole, and as it came around, she leaned over my shoulder and spooned a wobbling pile of it onto my plate before I could cover it with my hand. "Made with love," she said. I asked what was in the crust, because it glistened in a way corn doesn't. She waved the serving spoon like a scepter. "Oh, for heaven's sake, 1 bite won't kill you." The table laughed. Not mean laughter mostly. The easy laughter of people who have never watched an airway close. I sat there with my pulse in my ears and did the math no one else at that table had to do, and then I smiled and said, "I like my airway the size it is," and passed my plate to Kyle. A few people chuckled. Lorraine's eyes did something I'd never seen eyes do at a holiday table. They went flat, just for a second, like a pond icing over. Later, in the kitchen, I heard Brooke telling the aunts her theory, that I'd invented the whole allergy to get out of eating at my mother-in-law's, that girls online do it all the time, that there are whole videos about it. Kyle heard it too. In the car, he gripped the wheel and said, "She doesn't mean anything by it." I remember looking at his profile in the dashboard light and wondering, for the first time, how long a man can stand in the middle of a road before something hits him. By the following spring, I had 11 episodes in a year and a half typed into my phone. Every single one landed within hours of food that came from Lorraine's kitchen. Including, and this is the one that kept me up at night, a container of chicken soup she sent over when I was home with the flu. Kyle brought it to me himself, proud of her for the gesture. I ate half a cup and spent the evening covered in hives with my tongue feeling 2 sizes too big. When I laid the pattern out for Kyle, dates, meals, symptoms, like I was presenting at rounds, he did the thing loyal sons do. He found the innocent explanation and held onto it with both hands. "Mom's kitchen is older than we are, Tor. Cross-contact, not a conspiracy. You said yourself her pans are ancient. And here's the honest truth. I couldn't prove him wrong. I work in clinical nutrition. I know the difference between correlation and causation, and I knew exactly what I had. A chart full of correlation and not one shred of proof that anyone had put anything anywhere. Think about what the accusation sounds like out loud. My 63-year-old church lady mother-in-law is deliberately feeding me shellfish to prove I'm faking. Say that with no evidence and watch your marriage end and your name curdle in 2 counties. Dietitians don't guess in the chart. We document, and we wait for the labs. So I made a decision that was equal parts self-defense and stubborn professional habit, the decision that would eventually put a woman in prison. I did what I was trained to do. I started charting for real. And Lorraine, though I didn't know it yet, escalated her dosage. Here's where it gets darker, and I need you to see it the way I saw it. Slowly, one strange Sunday at a time. After I stopped eating her cooking, the episodes should have stopped. They didn't. They got worse. One Sunday in early May, I ate nothing at that house but my own brisket and a slice of pie from the dessert table, and by 9 that night the hives had spread across my back like a map of somewhere I never wanted to go. I took 2 antihistamines and sat on the bathroom floor with my epinephrine pen in my hand, doing the slow breathing I'd watched nurses coach patients through, deciding minute by minute whether this was the time I'd have to use it on myself. It stayed mild enough. Barely. Afterward, I did what I do whenever a patient on my floor reacts to a tray. I traced the exposure. What had I actually put in my mouth? My own food. Coffee from her pot. And dessert. Always dessert. Because dessert was the one course Lorraine plated herself in the kitchen and carried out with your name on it. She'd hand it over like communion. This piece is for Tori. I cut it special. I used to think it was hospitality, the one warm thread left between us. Hospitality. She was plating my slice alone, in a kitchen no one watched, every single week, and I had been thanking her for it. So I quietly gave up dessert and coffee too, and I watched her watch my plate, and I saw something in her face I had no name for yet. It looked like frustration. It looked like a scientist losing access to her lab. The family noticed I'd stopped eating, because of course they did. In a family like the Myers, your plate is public property. At a cousin's graduation party, 2 aunts cornered me by the sheet cake to explain that family is everything and that Lorraine had cried to them on the phone, actually cried, over my coldness. At first grace, the pastor took both of Lorraine's hands after service and thanked God for women who still feed their neighbors, while she dabbed her eyes and glanced sideways to make sure I was watching. And Brooke found her weapon. She shared an article in the family group chat about attention-seeking behavior and made-up food intolerances. No names attached, with a little comment. So glad someone finally said it. 11 relatives saw it. 3 of them liked it. Nobody said a word in my defense, including, and it still costs me something to say this, my own husband. Kyle's contribution was a plea. Just eat a little something at Mom's. A roll, some salad, for the optics. Optics. I looked at this man I loved, this man who taught teenagers what histamine does for a living, and I said, optics don't go into anaphylaxis. I do. He didn't have an answer. To his credit, he didn't offer a fake one. He just looked tired, caught between the 2 of us like a man standing in a doorway during an earthquake, still telling himself the house wasn't really shaking. The house was shaking. And his mother was down in the foundation with a chisel, smiling up at everyone, taking requests for Sunday. Before I tell you about the barbecue that finally cracked my husband's certainty, if you've ever sat at a table where your no was treated as an insult, tell me about it in the comments. I read everyone, and it reminds me none of us were ever as alone as that table made us feel. And subscribe, because what my mother-in-law did next, you'll want to hear all the way to the end. Memorial Day, Lorraine's backyard, 20 guests, red-checked tablecloths. I'd planned it like a field operation. I brought my own burger patties, my own bun, my own little cooler, and I grilled my food myself with the tongs I carried from home. I know how that sounds. I knew how it looked. I did it anyway, and I was right to. Because 40 minutes after I ate a burger that never left my sight, my neck started to flush, and my throat got that tight, itchy feeling like a wool scarf pulled one loop too far. Not full anaphylaxis, antihistamines held it, barely. But real, measurable, frightening. And here's the detail that took me months to learn. While I was carrying my cooler in from the car, Lorraine had been at the grill ahead of me, brushing the hot grates with her seasoned garlic butter. So nothing sticks, a cousin told me later. My burger never left my sight. The grill it cooked on did. It is very easy to fold ground-dried shrimp into seasoned butter, and garlic swallows the smell whole. That afternoon, all I knew was my own skin. I found a bathroom, took my pills, pressed a cold washcloth to my neck, and came back out to hear Lorraine telling a semicircle of neighbors, in her gentlest church voice, "It's all in her head, Sweetheart stress. It's terrible what young wives put on themselves these days. She caught my eye across the yard and smiled at me with so much pity, and I understood I was watching a performance that had been running for 2 years with me as the unpaid lead. The drive home was silent. Except this time, the silence was Kyle's, and it had a crack in it. I went back to Dr. Whitman that week and told him everything, clinically, dates and doses of antihistamines, like a case presentation. He redid my blood work. My antibody levels had climbed. "You're being exposed," he said, flat, no drama, repeatedly. "And Tori, you know this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Reactions can escalate. Every exposure is rolling the dice, and the next one can be the one that doesn't stop at hives." He renewed my prescriptions, added a third auto-injector for my work bag, and walked me through the protocol I could already recite. Inject early, thigh, call 911, second dose if symptoms don't turn around in about 5 minutes, always the emergency room after, because reactions can come back hours later when you think you're safe. Then he took off his glasses, and this careful, gray-haired allergy specialist who'd been practicing since before I was born asked me the question no one in my own family had asked in 2 years. "Is someone feeding you shellfish?" I heard myself defending them. Old kitchen, cross-contact, coincidence. He let me finish and said, "Cross-contact doesn't follow one person around for 2 years and skip her husband, who eats from the same pots." Then he wrote something in my chart. I typed his exact words into my phone in the parking garage with my hands not quite steady, because hearing your own quiet fear said out loud by a man with 40 years of medicine behind him does something to you. It moves the fear out of your head, and once it's out of your head, you can't put it back. That Friday, I sat Kyle down at our kitchen table and gave him a boundary with no negotiation in it. I was done eating anything from his mother's kitchen. Anything. I would come to Sunday dinners after the meal. For coffee I poured myself from a mug I washed myself, or I would not come at all. I wasn't asking permission, and I wasn't opening a debate. Kyle stared at his hands for a long time. The Memorial Day crack was still in him, and I watched him choose, for the first time, not to argue. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Tor." Just that, and it cost him more than he let me see. Lorraine's counterattack came within a day. She called Kyle and cried for 40 minutes, real tears, she could summon them like a faucet, about how I was starving myself to spite her, how she'd survived widowhood and 31 years of thankless work only to be treated like a poisoner in her own family. Interesting word choice, by the way. Nobody had said poison. She called Brooke, who called the aunts, who called each other, and by Wednesday the family consensus was that Tori was cruel, and Lorraine was a saint enduring me. And then, Thursday, Lorraine changed tactics in a way that should have relieved me and instead raised every hair on my arms. She invited me over, alone. "Just us girls, to make peace. I'll put the kettle on." I said yes, because peace was still the thing I wanted most in the world, but I promised myself 2 things on the drive over. I would be kind, and I would not swallow one single thing. She was warm that afternoon, warmer than she'd been since my wedding, and it scared me more than the coldness ever had. Halfway through her second story about Kyle's childhood, her phone rang, someone from the church about a funeral luncheon, and she stepped out to the garden to take it. The kettle started fussing. I went to find the tea, and I want to be precise here, because everything afterward hangs on this moment. I opened her dry goods cupboard looking for tea bags, nothing else. And there, on the second shelf, tucked behind the flour canister where no casual hand would ever land, sat a glass jar with no label. Fine powder, pinkish orange, packed tight. I unscrewed the lid and the smell hit me. Concentrated, briny, unmistakable. The smell of a dock at low tide ground into dust. Dried shrimp, milled fine. In the kitchen of a woman who had announced for years that she hated seafood, wouldn't cook it, wouldn't have the smell in her house. My hands went cold, but my training kicked in before my feelings did. You don't move evidence. You document it. I photographed the jar where it stood, the shelf, the flour canister in front of it, time and date stamped on every frame. I put the lid back exactly as I'd found it, at the same angle. And that night, at my own kitchen table, I opened a fresh notebook and did what I'd been half doing in my phone for 2 years. I built the chart for real. Dates, meals, symptoms, who cooked, who plated, photographs printed and taped in. If it isn't charted, it didn't happen. Fine, I'd chart everything. A jar isn't a crime. I knew that the way I know a fever isn't a diagnosis, so I did the responsible thing, the by-the-book thing, and it blew up in my face exactly the way the book never warns you. I showed Kyle the photos. I watched my husband's face go through 5 stages in 10 seconds: confusion, denial, recognition, horror, and then, because he was still her son, retreat. He wanted an innocent explanation so badly, so he went to her, gently, no photos mentioned, and said Tori had noticed an unlabeled jar in the pantry that worried her because of the allergy. Lorraine didn't blink. Oh, that little jar? That's a spice blend from the Henderson's girl, from the Church International Fair. I don't even know what's in it. I keep meaning to toss it. Smooth as a hymn, and when I made an excuse to be in that kitchen 9 days later, the jar was gone. The shelf was wiped. The flour canister had been pushed back flush against the wall. That's the moment I understood what I was actually dealing with. Not a stubborn old woman with a grudge, but a careful one with a story ready for every door you knocked on. She'd erased the evidence and then, for dessert, she called Brooke in tears to report that I had been going through her cupboards like a police officer, that she couldn't even feel safe in her own kitchen. By Sunday, the aunts knew I'd searched her house. My caution became my crime. Her crime became her cross to bear. If you've ever fought someone like this, you know, they don't defend themselves. They redecorate the truth. I want to pause on my marriage, because this is the part the fairy tales skip. Kyle wasn't a villain. He was a hostage who didn't know it. He'd lie awake at 2 a.m. staring at the ceiling fan, and I knew he was replaying it. The jar, the vanishing act. 20 years of his mother's voice saying family first. One night he finally said it out loud. If I believe you, then my mother is a monster. Do you understand what you're asking me to carry? And I said the sentence I'd rehearsed with my therapist, the one boundary I could offer him. I'm not asking you to choose between us. I'm telling you what I will no longer risk. You get to decide what you do with that. Jess, meanwhile, wanted me to call the police that same week. She sat across from me in the hospital cafeteria stabbing a salad and said, Tori, if a patient told you this story, you'd have called it in already. She was right. And I told her why I hadn't. Picture the report. A photo of an unlabeled jar that no longer exists. A notebook of symptoms written by the accuser herself. No witness, no lab, no exposure anyone saw happen. A hospital dietitian accusing her church-going mother-in-law of poisoning. I'd hand Lorraine the best chapter of her martyr story and a lawyer, and I'd hand my license a question mark. So what are you waiting for? Jess asked. Something with a timestamp that isn't mine, I said. Witnesses, a camera. I just didn't expect, when it finally came, that the camera would be pointed at my own plate. Then came 3 months of the most spiteful peace you can imagine. I kept my boundary completely. Not one bite, not one sip, nothing from Lorraine's kitchen. And my body kept the receipts. 3 months, 0 episodes. Not an itch, not a welt. 2 years of mystery reactions vanished the day her food did, and my notebook turned that vanishing into columns and dates. A jury wouldn't see it for months yet, but I already knew what it was. The cleanest natural experiment anyone ever ran on herself. Lorraine knew it too. That's the thing about people like her. They can read a room faster than anyone, because the room is all they care about. So she pivoted. The tears dried up. The complaints stopped. She went sweet, expansive, generous, telling everyone at First Grace how wonderful it was that I finally seemed healthy. See? All in her head, like I said, sweetheart. She let go of that stress and look at her now. She said it at a baptism reception with her arm around my waist, squeezing, while I held a glass of water I'd poured myself and smiled at the pastor. She was rewriting the ending before the story was over. My health was her vindication. 2 years of caution erased into a mood swing I'd recovered from. And then Brooke announced she'd booked the private room at the Cedar Room for their mother's 64th birthday dinner. A restaurant. Neutral ground. So Tori can't say anybody's kitchen is out to get her, Brooke said in the group chat, with a little winking face. 40 guests. I stared at that message for a long time. I want to walk you through why I said yes, because I've been asked, and it's a fair question with a better answer than people expect. A restaurant was the one battlefield where Lorraine didn't control the food. Professional kitchen, trained staff, dishes I chose myself. Kyle begged. And it was begging, this exhausted man who hadn't shared a meal in peace with his whole family in months. It's not her cooking, Tor. It's the safest it will ever be. He was right on the facts. And I'll tell you the truth under the facts. After 2 years of being the difficult one, some tired part of me wanted to sit at a table with that family and eat food that couldn't be used against me. So I said yes, and then I ran it like a preoperative checklist, because wanting peace doesn't mean you stop being the woman who reads labels for a living. I called the Cedar Room 2 days ahead and spoke with the kitchen manager about a severe shellfish allergy. He was wonderful. They deal with it constantly. They flagged my ticket. I pre-ordered the one safest thing on the menu. Plain grilled chicken, no sauce, steamed vegetables. I carried both auto-injectors in a purse that never left my shoulder. I sat next to Kyle, 1 seat from the door. I controlled every variable a human being can control in someone else's building. All but one. She arrived in a lavender dress with a corsage on her wrist like it was prom, hugged me at the door in front of everyone and whispered, "I'm so glad you came, sweetheart." I actually believed we might get through the night. The private room at the Cedar Room glowed like a greeting card. 40 guests, white tablecloths, a 2-tier birthday cake on its own little table, gold napkins Brooke had folded into fans. Lorraine floated between tables collecting compliments the way other people collect coats. Brooke gave a toast about family being everything, and looked at me on the word everything, and I raised my water glass anyway, because you can be right and gracious at the same time. I'd been practicing for 2 years. My chicken had been ordered ahead, flagged for allergy, cooked in a clean pan by people with no stake in my marriage. For the first time in months, I felt something dangerously close to relaxed. Then, somewhere between the salads and the entrees, Lorraine pushed back her chair and announced she was going to check on the birthday cake. I want to tell the kitchen exactly how to plate it. A birthday girl gets one job. Laughter, applause. Off she went in her lavender dress, and I thought nothing of it. Why would I? The cake wasn't mine to eat anyway. Through the doorway of the private room you could see a slice of the restaurant. The bar, the swinging door, the long stainless counter where finished plates sat under heat lamps waiting for servers. The pass, they call it. I saw her standing there, close to the counter, chatting with a young server, patting his arm, grandmotherly as a greeting card. Then Brooke pulled me up for a group photo, arm around my shoulders, cheek against mine, smiling for the camera like sisters. Say cheese. By the time we sat back down, the entrees were coming out. The plates came out on the arms of 3 servers, and then a 4th figure came behind them, and it was Lorraine, carrying 1 plate all by herself, high and careful, like an offering. My plate. She set it down in front of me with a little flourish, plain grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, exactly what I'd ordered, and squeezed my shoulder with her ringed hand. "I told them to take extra special care of my daughter-in-law," she announced to the table. I carried it myself so nobody could mix it up. People actually said, "Aw." Then she leaned down, close to my ear but loud enough for the neighbors, and delivered the old joke, the one from Thanksgiving, the one I'd heard her say with a spoon of corn casserole hovering over my plate. "Go on, sweetheart. 1 bite won't kill you." And I, after 2 clean days of planning, after the phone call to the kitchen, after the flagged ticket and the clean pan, I laughed politely, and I cut a piece of chicken, and I ate it. Because it was my food, from a professional kitchen, ordered by me, and the whole point of this dinner was that her hands weren't in it. It tasted slightly off. deeper than plain chicken should taste, salty in a low-tide way that registered somewhere old in my brain half a second after I swallowed. I took one more bite to check. I actually remember thinking, that's not right. And then the first ant crawl of tingling started at my lips and fanned out toward my ears, and my tongue began to feel like it belonged to someone bigger. Heat climbed out of my collar. I knew this staircase. I'd been on it before, and I knew how fast it moved. And I reached for my purse on the back of my chair, and my hand already didn't feel like mine. Dr. Whitman had given me a script for this, and the script saved my life. I got the auto-injector out while I could still work a zipper. I said, loud and flat, "Kyle, allergy, call 911. And I put that pen through my dress into my outer thigh and held it there while the room turned into a kicked anthill around me. The whoosh of chairs, someone's wine glass going over, Brooke saying, oh my God," on a loop. I got myself onto the floor, on my back, legs propped on a chair because passing out standing up is how people crack their skulls. My throat was a drinking straw someone was pinching. Kyle knelt over me, phone on speaker, voice shaking and clear, reading the address off the menu. And over his shoulder, above me, I heard Lorraine's voice cut through the panic. Not frightened. Corrective. She does this. Everyone stay calm, she does this. It's psychological. She's done it for years. Watch, she'll be fine in a minute. 60+ people in that restaurant heard my mother-in-law diagnose me from a standing position while my lips went blue. A woman from the far table pushed through. Retired nurse, I'd learn later, took one look at me and snapped, "That is anaphylaxis. Be quiet or be useful." 5 minutes in, my breathing was still whistling and the edges of the room were going soft, so I lifted 2 fingers, and Kyle understood. And he did the thing we'd practiced on the trainer pen at our kitchen table 100 times. Second injector, other thigh. The paramedics came through the private room in a wall of navy blue, oxygen mask, monitor leads, the fast, gentle hands I've watched 1,000 times from the other side. As they wheeled me out past the bar, the last thing I saw before the doors was a small black dome in the ceiling over the pass. A camera, pointed at the counter where the finished plates sit, where she'd been standing. Then the night folded up around me. I want to pause here, because some of you carry an EpiPen, or love somebody who does. 2 injectors. Always. Use it early and call 911 even if the first shot seems to work, because reactions can come back hours later. That knowledge kept me alive at that table. If this story is holding you the way that room held its breath, subscribe now, because what the police found days later changed my family forever. They took me to Miami Valley South, which is a strange kind of homecoming. Wheeled through your own hospital's emergency department under an oxygen mask while people you've worked with for 11 years read your vitals off the monitor. More epinephrine. IV fluids running wide open because my blood pressure had dropped into the basement. Antihistamines, steroids, and the long watchful hours after, because anaphylaxis has an ugly habit of circling back for a second pass just when everyone relaxes. They drew blood within the first hour, and one of the tubes was for a serum tryptase level. Remember that word, because it mattered later. Tryptase is an enzyme your mast cells dump into your blood during a true systemic allergic reaction. Mine came back sky high. There is no stress, no nerves, no psychological episode on this earth that raises your tryptase. My own blood, drawn in front of a dozen witnesses in a hospital where everyone knew my name, had just called Lorraine a liar. I spent that night in the ICU with pressors on standby, and Kyle folded into the chair beside my bed, and somewhere around 3 a.m. he came apart. The ER doctor had told him plainly, a reaction that's severe meant a significant exposure. Not a trace, not a shared fryer, not a speck of cross-contact. Significant. In plain grilled chicken, ordered ahead, flagged for allergy, cooked in a clean pan. Kyle sat there doing the math I'd been doing alone for 2 years. The pot roast, the soup, the garlic bread, the jar behind the flour, the vanishing act, and his mother's voice over my body on that restaurant floor, steady as a metronome. She does this. It's psychological. He took my hand, careful of the IV, and he said, "Tell me what you need me to do." My voice was a ruin, but it worked. "Go home," I said, "and bring me my notebook." The next morning, propped up in a hospital bed with a voice like a rusted gate, I called the Beaver Creek Police non-emergency line and reported a suspected deliberate poisoning. That afternoon, Detective Renee Marsh came to my room, mid-40s, gray at the temples, the unhurried eyes of a woman who has heard everything twice. I gave her my statement the way I present a patient at care rounds, and I will tell you, it is the most useful skill I have ever brought to a fight. Item 1. The restaurant should still have my plate. The staff had bagged everything after the incident for their own liability, and I asked her to request it be preserved and sent to a lab, because if there was shellfish protein in that chicken, a lab would find it. Item 2. There's a camera over the pass. Please pull the footage before it's overwritten. Most systems recycle in about 30 days. She wants to know what the camera would show. The pass, I said, where finished plates wait. My mother-in-law spent several minutes standing at it, alone, shortly before a plate she personally carried to me nearly killed me. Item 3. I handed her the notebook. 2 years. Dates, meals, symptoms. Who cooked? Who plated? The photographs of an unlabeled jar of what I believed was ground-dried shrimp hidden behind a flour canister in a kitchen that supposedly never held seafood, time-stamped, with the shelf and the room in frame. Item 4. Dr. Whitman's records, including the day he asked me, in writing, whether someone was feeding me shellfish. Marsh turned the notebook pages slowly, and about halfway through she stopped and looked at me over the top of it. "You documented everything," she said. I told her the truth. "I'm a hospital dietitian. Documenting food is the whole job." 2 days later, my phone rang in the discharge lounge. It was Marsh, and her voice had changed. "You need to come see this footage." They sat me in a small room with a laptop, Kyle's hand on my shoulder, and Detective Marsh hit play. There's the pass, in color, sharper than I expected. There's the young server setting finished plates under the heat lamps. And there's Lorraine, lavender dress, corsage, drifting up to the counter like she owns the franchise. She chats. She points toward the private room, says something that makes the kid laugh, and he turns to grab the next tray. 11 seconds. That's how long his back was turned, and I watched my mother-in-law open her handbag, take out a small bottle, and pour a thin, unhurried stream over the chicken on the end plate. My plate. The one flagged with the allergy tick the kitchen had dutifully clipped to it. Then, and this is the detail I will never scrub out of my memory, she took a teaspoon from the counter setup and smoothed it over the meat, painting it in. Even. Careful. The way you'd glaze a ham. She dropped the spoon in a bus tub, patted her hair, picked up the plate, and smiled her way toward the private room to deliver it to me herself. The lab results landed the same week and put numbers to it. The chicken was saturated with shellfish protein, tropomyosin levels consistent with a concentrated extract or reduction. The analyst's note said, in the driest scientific language you'll ever love, not consistent with incidental cross-contact. The server confirmed a nice older lady in lavender had insisted on carrying the blue dress girl's plate herself. Marsh laid it out for me, with the footage, the lab, the tryptase, and my notebook. She had probable cause for a search warrant. For what? I asked. Her house? Marsh nodded, gathering this folder. If she did this for 2 years, there's a supply. Poisoners keep their pantry. They went in Thursday morning. Lorraine served the officers coffee. She thought they had come to hear her side. What they found in the recipe drawer, under 30 years of index cards. A spiral notebook with a floral cover, the kind you'd buy for a Bible study. 26 entries in 2 years, in Lorraine's round, tidy cafeteria handwriting. Dated. Each one listed the dish, the delivery method, and the amount. Half a teaspoon of concentrated shrimp stock reduced into chicken soup. Ground-dried shrimp folded into seasoned butter for garlic bread. A pinch, in the crust of the corn casserole. And then a final column. And I need you to brace for the final column, because it was labeled, result. Mild fuss, left early. Dramatic performance for Kyle. Nothing visible. Proving my point. 26 experiments on a living woman graded like homework. On the first page, dated 2 years back, she'd written her thesis statement, underlined twice. She is lying to my son. I am going to prove it. They also took a mail-order bottle of concentrated seafood extract from her bedroom closet and, this still astonishes me, the jar. The same unlabeled jar from behind the flour canister. She hadn't thrown it away after all. She'd moved it to her dresser, with the photographs and the china, because people like Lorraine don't discard their instruments. They keep trophies. And the notebook went back further than me. An early page from long before my time, read, "Swapped Bee's special bread." She ate every bite. No sickness until I told her. Proof. B. And another line, older still, about her late sister-in-law, the one who died before I ever joined this family. Faked her migraines too. They all do it for attention. I was not her first experiment. I was just the first one who charted back. They arrested her that morning. Attempted murder, plus contaminating food for human consumption, and she was out on bail by the weekend with a no-contact order between us, which is why what came next arrived by email, sent to the entire family. Subject line. Family meeting Sunday. Time to clear up this misunderstanding. She invited everyone, including me. I said yes, calmly. I had one condition, and it wasn't for her. Here's the thing about that email. The no-contact order ran one direction. It bound Lorraine. She was forbidden from contacting me. And she'd just done it in writing, with the whole family copied, before her coffee went cold. I took the email straight to Detective Marsh and the prosecutor, an assistant prosecuting attorney named Susan Hale, and we talked it through like adults. Hale was blunt. The order didn't stop me from going anywhere, but the smart move was to stay home and let the violation speak. And then, Marsh said the thing that changed my mind about the smart move. She's going to hold that meeting either way, and a woman who kept that notebook cannot help herself in front of an audience. Anything she says to that room, those are witnesses. So we made it clean. I would go with Kyle, an invited member of the family, sitting quietly with his wife. I would say almost nothing, and Marsh would be nearby, because there was, after all, an open matter of a defendant contacting her victim. Sunday afternoon, Lorraine's living room looked like a reception. 14 relatives on the good furniture, the pastor from First Grace with a teacup balanced on his knee, a coffee cake nobody touched, the cuckoo clock ticking over it all like a metronome at a recital. Lorraine had dressed for church. She opened with tears, the faucet kind, about a widow who fed this county for 31 years being dragged from her home in handcuffs on the word of a daughter-in-law who never liked her. The police were confused, she said. Lawyers twist things, she said. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, and softer, and for one dangerous second I watched 14 faces lean toward her like plants toward a window, and I understood exactly how she'd gotten away with everything for 2 years. Then she made her mistake. She'd always made the same one. She needed to win the room, not just survive it. She stretched a trembling hand toward me, in front of everyone, and said, "Ask her. Ask her to show you one shred of proof besides her little rash." The room turned to me. I looked at Kyle. He nodded. I opened the folder in my lap. I didn't stand up. I want that on the record. After 2 years I'd earned a speech, and I didn't give one. I took 3 pieces of paper out of the folder and laid them on Lorraine's coffee table, one at a time, next to the untouched cake, and I kept my voice at the exact volume I use to tell a patient their labs are back. The first was a still frame from the restaurant camera. Lorraine at the pass in her lavender dress, handbag open, bottle tipped over a plate. "The Cedar Room keeps a camera over the counter where the food comes up," I said. "This is you. 4 minutes before you carried me my plate." The second was the laboratory report. "This is the chicken. Concentrated shellfish protein, all the way through it. The analyst wrote that it could not have gotten there by accident." The third was a page from my hospital chart. "This is my blood, drawn an hour after I went down. The tryptase level proves the reaction was real. Bodies don't fake that number, and heads don't make it. I paused, and in the quiet you could hear the cuckoo clock and somebody's stomach and nothing else. And you already know about the notebook, I said. It's your handwriting. The papers went around the room hand to hand, the way her casseroles used to. An aunt read the still frame and put her fingers over her mouth. Uncle Ray, who has laughed at every family gathering I've ever attended, looked at the lab report and did not laugh. And the pastor? This is the moment I knew the tide had turned for good. The pastor read all 3 pages, set his teacup down on the carpet, and quietly moved his chair away from her. 6 inches. A whole sermon in 6 inches. Kyle stood up next to my chair and he faced his mother, and his voice cracked on the first word, but held after that. Mom, I've seen the notebook. I've read all of it. Don't make Tori show them the rest. And Lorraine looked around her living room, at her congregation, at her jury, and watched the room tilt away from her for the first time in her life. People like Lorraine don't confess. They erupt. It started low, a kettle sound, and then she was on her feet, 64 years old and shaking with rage, and the church voice was gone. What came out instead was the truth, at full volume, in front of 14 relatives and a man of God. You want to talk about that notebook? Fine. Yes, I tested her. Somebody in this family had to. She waltzed in here with her pills and her pens and her rules, and my son looked at her like she hung the moon, and nobody else had the courage to ask questions. The room made a sound like a building settling. Brooke said, "Mom, stop," in a voice with no air in it. Lorraine did not stop. And you know what I proved? If that allergy were real, she'd have died the first year. I was careful. I measured every single dose like a pharmacist, a pinch, a half spoon. I wrote it all down. That's not murder. That's science. I watched an aunt physically recoil. I watched the pastor close his eyes. She wheeled on me, finger out, mascara running into the creases her smile had spent decades carving, and she screamed the sentence she'd been saying softly for 2 years. The lullaby version finally played at its true speed. There is nothing wrong with you. It was all in your head. It was always all in your... You wrote it down, Lorraine. I said it from my chair, without raising my voice at all, and it cut her off cleaner than a shout ever could. 26 entries, dates and doses, in your handwriting, in your recipe drawer. It was never in my head, it was in the food. Silence. The cuckoo clock ticked. Somewhere in the kitchen the coffee maker sighed. Lorraine stood in the middle of her own living room, chest heaving, and watched 14 people look at the floor rather than at her. I picked up my purse, took Kyle's hand, and stood. At the front door I turned around, because there was one more thing that was mine to say, and I'd waited 2 years to say it. You kept notes, Lorraine. So did I. And then I opened the door for Detective Marsh, who had been on the porch long enough to hear every word of the science speech, and who stepped past me into that living room with the warrant for the bail violation already in her hand. She was taken into custody in front of the same 14 people she'd summoned to watch her win, while the pastor prayed quietly into his folded hands and Brooke sat frozen on the love seat, white as the good tablecloth. Contacting me had violated her bail conditions. The judge revoked her release, and this time there was no weekend miracle. The legal machine did its slow, boring, beautiful work for 5 months, and I learned that justice doesn't look like a movie. It looks like paperwork with your name spelled correctly. The evidence stacked up like cordwood. The footage, the lab report on the chicken, the tryptase level. Dr. Whitman's records, with his question written in my chart a year before the restaurant. My notebook, cross-referenced against hers. And hers, 26 entries in her own hand, authenticated by a document examiner against 4 decades of recipe cards. And now, on top of it all, the sworn statements of 14 family members and one pastor who heard her explain, at volume, that she'd measured every dose like a pharmacist. Premeditation, pattern, and pride. Her lawyer looked at all that, and did the only sane thing left. 2 weeks before trial, Lorraine pleaded guilty to attempted murder and contaminating food for human consumption. At sentencing, the judge did something I didn't expect. She read from the notebook out loud. Dish, dose, result. Mild fuss, dramatic performance. Nothing visible, proving my point. Then she looked down at Lorraine over her glasses and called the whole thing 2 years of calculated cruelty, performed as love, on a victim whose only defense was her own carefulness. 15 years. Lorraine turned around once in that courtroom, one slow rotation in her county jumpsuit, and found my face in the gallery. I waited for something. Sorrow, shame, anything. What I got was the head tilt. The slow student look. One last time, like I was the one who'd failed the test. She never apologized. She told the local paper, through her lawyer, that she was a misunderstood mother who loved too hard. Attempted murder. 15 years. After a lifetime of casseroles, my mother-in-law finally got full credit for her cooking. Brooke came to my house a month after sentencing. No casserole, no performance, and stood on my porch holding her keys like a rosary. The bread entry, she said. B is me. She'd been 19, newly diagnosed celiac, and her mother had secretly swapped her special loaf to prove the whole thing was drama. She'd been sick for a week, and Lorraine had patted her hand and said, "See, you're fine." And Brooke had chosen to believe her, because the alternative was unbearable. She'd spent 20 years choosing to believe her, all the way through watching me leave family dinners covered in hives. "I told myself she'd never go further with you than she went with me," Brooke said. "I'm not asking you to forgive that. I just needed to say it wasn't only you. It was never only you." Her mother's notebook had called our dead aunt a faker too, a woman who spent her last years being teased about her migraines by the family cook. I believed Brooke was sorry. I also believe an apology is a doorway, not a bridge. You still have to walk the whole distance yourself. I told her that. I said, "Get tested again, get a therapist, then we'll see." She nodded and cried in her car in my driveway for a while, and I let her. And that was the most honest visit anyone from that family ever paid me. In the months after, letters came from the aunts. Some full of real shame, some full of weather. A few relatives simply evaporated. Grief sorts a family like a sieve. You find out quickly what's stone and what's sand. What settled at the bottom was smaller than the family I'd married into, and worth more. I took 3 weeks off work to let my body and the rest of me catch up with each other. The body healed first. Bodies are generous that way. The rest took longer, and I want to say this plainly for anyone who needs it. I sat down with a therapist because for months I couldn't eat food I hadn't watched being made. My chest would tighten at potlucks, at drive-thrus, at my own sister's table. She gave it its proper name, hypervigilance. A normal response to being hunted at mealtimes for 2 years, and we worked on it the way you work on anything real, slowly, with setbacks, without shame. Kyle did his own work, in his own chair, on his own guilt, and then we did ours together in couples counseling. He learned to cook. He reads labels now like a man studying for boards. At restaurants he tells the server about my allergy before I can, every time, and I've stopped minding. He lost his mother. Not to prison, exactly. To the truth. He grieves her sometimes, the mother he thought he had, and I've learned to sit with him in that without needing to fix it, because that mother was real to him even if she was never real. Sunday dinner happens at our house now. My kitchen, my ingredients, the door open to anyone who respects the house rules, and the rules fit on an index card. Believe people about their own bodies. Jess comes. Brooke, lately, sometimes, on probation and knowing it. I still carry 2 epinephrine pens everywhere I go, not out of fear anymore, out of respect for my own life, which it turns out is what all of this was ever about. If I could leave you with one thing, it's this. When someone tells you your pain is all in your head, believe your body first and write everything down. Because love that demands you risk your life to prove it was never love. It was control wearing love's apron. That's my story. 2 years of being called a liar, one notebook against another, and a sentence that finally said my life was real. If someone has ever dismissed what you know about your own body, take this as your sign. Trust it, document it, and never apologize for the boundaries that keep you alive. Share this video with someone who needs it, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. I've read all of it. Don't make Tori show them the rest. And Lorraine looked around her living room, at her congregation, at her jury, and watched the room tilt away from her for the first time in her life. People like Lorraine don't confess. They erupt. It started low, a kettle sound, and then she was on her feet, 64 years old and shaking with rage, and the church voice was gone. What came out instead was the truth, at full volume, in front of 14 relatives and a man of God. You want to talk about that notebook? Fine. Yes, I tested her. Somebody in this family had to. She waltzed in here with her pills and her pens and her rules, and my son looked at her like she hung the moon, and nobody else had the courage to ask questions. The room made a sound like a building settling. Brooke said, "Mom, stop," in a voice with no air in it. Lorraine did not stop. And you know what I proved? If that allergy were real, she'd have died the first year. I was careful. I measured every single dose like a pharmacist, a pinch, a half spoon. I wrote it all down. That's not murder. That's science. I watched an aunt physically recoil. I watched the pastor close his eyes. She wheeled on me, finger out, mascara running into the creases her smile had spent decades carving, and she screamed the sentence she'd been saying softly for 2 years. The lullaby version finally played at its true speed. There is nothing wrong with you. It was all in your head. It was always all in your... You wrote it down, Lorraine. I said it from my chair, without raising my voice at all, and it cut her off cleaner than a shout ever could. 26 entries, dates and doses, in your handwriting, in your recipe drawer. It was never in my head. It was in the food. Silence. The cuckoo clock ticked. Somewhere in the kitchen, the coffee maker sighed. Lorraine stood in the middle of her own living room, chest heaving, and watched 14 people look at the floor rather than at her. I picked up my purse, took Kyle's hand, and stood. At the front door I turned around, because there was one more thing that was mine to say, and I'd waited 2 years to say it. You kept notes, Lorraine. So did I. And then I opened the door for Detective Marsh, who had been on the porch long enough to hear every word of the science speech, and who stepped past me into that living room with the warrant for the bail violation already in her hand. She was taken into custody in front of the same 14 people she'd summoned to watch her win, while the pastor prayed quietly into his folded hands and Brooke sat frozen on the love seat, white as the good tablecloth. Contacting me had violated her bail conditions. The judge revoked her release, and this time there was no weekend miracle. The legal machine did its slow, boring, beautiful work for 5 months, and I learned that justice doesn't look like a movie. It looks like paperwork with your name spelled correctly. The evidence stacked up like cordwood. The footage, the lab report on the chicken, the tryptase level. Dr. Whitman's records, with his question written in my chart a year before the restaurant. My notebook, cross-referenced against hers. And hers, 26 entries in her own hand, authenticated by a document examiner against 4 decades of recipe cards. And now, on top of it all, the sworn statements of 14 family members and one pastor who heard her explain, at volume, that she'd measured every dose like a pharmacist. Premeditation, pattern, and pride. Her lawyer looked at all that, and did the only sane thing left. 2 weeks before trial, Lorraine pleaded guilty to attempted murder and contaminating food for human consumption. At sentencing, the judge did something I didn't expect. She read from the notebook out loud. Dish, dose, result. Mild fuss, dramatic performance. Nothing visible, proving my point. Then she looked down at Lorraine over her glasses and called the whole thing 2 years of calculated cruelty, performed as love, on a victim whose only defense was her own carefulness. 15 years. Lorraine turned around once in that courtroom, one slow rotation in her county jumpsuit, and found my face in the gallery. I waited for something. Sorrow, shame, anything. What I got was the head tilt. The slow student look. One last time, like I was the one who'd failed the test. She never apologized. She told the local paper, through her lawyer, that she was a misunderstood mother who loved too hard. Attempted murder. 15 years. After a lifetime of casseroles, my mother-in-law finally got full credit for her cooking. Brooke came to my house a month after sentencing. No casserole, no performance, and stood on my porch holding her keys like a rosary. The bread entry, she said. B is me. She'd been 19, newly diagnosed celiac, and her mother had secretly swapped her special loaf to prove the whole thing was drama. She'd been sick for a week, and Lorraine had patted her hand and said, "See, you're fine." And Brooke had chosen to believe her, because the alternative was unbearable. She'd spent 20 years choosing to believe her, all the way through watching me leave family dinners covered in hives. "I told myself she'd never go further with you than she went with me," Brooke said. "I'm not asking you to forgive that. I just needed to say it wasn't only you. It was never only you." Her mother's notebook had called our dead aunt a faker too, a woman who spent her last years being teased about her migraines by the family cook. I believed Brooke was sorry. I also believe an apology is a doorway, not a bridge. You still have to walk the whole distance yourself. I told her that. I said, "Get tested again. Get a therapist. Then we'll see." She nodded and cried in her car in my driveway for a while, and I let her. And that was the most honest visit anyone from that family ever paid me. In the months after, letters came from the aunts. Some full of real shame, some full of weather. A few relatives simply evaporated. Grief sorts a family like a sieve. You find out quickly what's stone and what's sand. What settled at the bottom was smaller than the family I'd married into, and worth more. I took 3 weeks off work to let my body and the rest of me catch up with each other. The body healed first. Bodies are generous that way. The rest took longer, and I want to say this plainly for anyone who needs it. I sat down with a therapist because for months I couldn't eat food I hadn't watched being made. My chest would tighten at potlucks, at drive-thrus, at my own sister's table. She gave it its proper name, hypervigilance. A normal response to being hunted at mealtimes for 2 years, and we worked on it the way you work on anything real, slowly, with setbacks, without shame. Kyle did his own work, in his own chair, on his own guilt, and then we did ours together in couples counseling. He learned to cook. He reads labels now like a man studying for boards. At restaurants he tells the server about my allergy before I can, every time, and I've stopped minding. He lost his mother. Not to prison, exactly. To the truth. He grieves her sometimes, the mother he thought he had, and I've learned to sit with him in that without needing to fix it, because that mother was real to him even if she was never real. Sunday dinner happens at our house now. My kitchen, my ingredients, the door open to anyone who respects the house rules, and the rules fit on an index card. Believe people about their own bodies. Jess comes. Brooke, lately, sometimes, on probation and knowing it. I still carry 2 epinephrine pens everywhere I go, not out of fear anymore, out of respect for my own life, which it turns out is what all of this was ever about. If I could leave you with one thing, it's this. When someone tells you your pain is all in your head, believe your body first and write everything down. Because love that demands you risk your life to prove it was never love. It was control wearing love's apron. That's my story. 2 years of being called a liar, 1 notebook against another, and a sentence that finally said my life was real. If someone has ever dismissed what you know about your own body, take this as your sign. Trust it, document it, and never apologize for the boundaries that keep you alive. Share this video with someone who needs it, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.